Brian. This is TGJ 2.0, Comtech and Copyright. Something to consider. So Steven Tyler of Aerosmith has involved the court system to prevent the President of the United States from playing his music at his rallies. So this is interesting because this implies that artists' rights are protected even when it comes to the President of the United States. And so this leads us to our discussion today. In fact, Ontario would like for us to be able to describe legal concepts and issues relating to these kinds of things: copyright, privacy rights, and consent. And this is what we'll cover, at least in part, today. Okay, so we're going to discuss why copyright law is important, what it covers, talk about it and education, talk about your rights, and how we're going to reference materials that we use. So it would seem that Aerosmith, so rock and roll artists, have the right to control where their music is used. And I'd invite you to pause the video for a second and think about what rights an artist should have. What rights they have for control over their art. So if you'd like, pause the video for a second and think about that. And while you're at it, is it just about money? Okay, so maybe you came to the idea that that artists should have rights over their material. In fact, the law in most modern countries agrees with you. And the basic underlying idea is that the creator of something should be the one to make money from their creation, and they should be able to control how and where it's used. So if Steven Tyler doesn't agree with Donald Trump's politics, he can tell him not to use his music in furthering the Republican agenda. Now this applies to the written word, so an essay, a book, an article. It applies to photographs, paintings, drawings, etc., video, sound, and much more. So we can think in terms of any kind of art can be protected under copyright law. With regards to respect for copyright, we can ask ourselves, do we have to ask the artist before we use any part of his or her work? Imagine if you're J.K. Rowling and you write Harry Potter, and someone has to ask you before they quote any portion of those books, before they reference any part of those. We can't talk to the artist every time we want to use something about their work. So instead, there are laws and guidelines that help us to understand how we can use and where we can use artists' material. And unfortunately, these are situation dependent. So the situation governs how we can use their work. So what defines the situation? Well, a quick answer is that it's complicated. And for this reason, many sources of material have licensing agreements that define the rules carefully. It does depend on whether you're making money or not. So if it's for commercial use, there are much larger restrictions on what you can do. But we're going to talk about the way we're going to behave in TGJ today. Okay. So maybe the most important question for us then is, Can I download images, sounds, video, etc. from Google searches and include it in my work? And the answer is, for starters, for commercial use, this is illegal. It is not allowed, with some exceptions. And the exceptions are free online repositories, some of which allow commercial use, some of which do not. And these online repositories are what we're going to use to support our work in TGJ. There is an argument that if we download images and sounds and videos for use in education with no profit, that we'd be allowed to do that. And you might do this, perhaps, in your science class. However, we in ComTech put ourselves in the position of the commercial artist who is doing this for profit, and so we will only use sources as if we are a commercial entity. So we're not interpreting these things from an educational point of view. So what you're going to do is you're going to use free online repositories for material. You're not going to grab material from other sources. A simple Google search is not allowed. And when you do use these online repositories, you will reference the sources. And we'll talk about how to do that in a minute. By the way, to clarify one other aspect, even in an educational setting, there is no situation where breaking the encryption or copy protection on software, music, or video is legal. It is always illegal, no matter what the application area. So this is something for us to keep in mind. All right, let's talk about then sources for free content. There are sources for sound effects like Freesound and Zapsplat and many others. There are sources for music. So if you want to put music behind your videos, you can go ahead and download from these areas and use that music. There are video sources. And many places where you can find images. Now you need to pay attention to their licensing rules. Typically, they'll give you excellent guidelines for how to reference the artist's work that you're taking. And you can see that I've used the reference from Creative Commons down below, use their referencing system. And this, once you're used to it, doesn't take a great deal of time. You can simply copy that to the clipboard from their referencing tool and then embed it into your system. Now you might ask yourself, what about my rights as an artist? What about the student's rights? In fact, as a student, you control the copyright for your submissions. I'm not free to distribute those or profit from them, and neither is the Halton District School Board. You have control over these things. However, if you upload them to a given repository, you are accepting the licensing agreements there. I have no control over that. You are accepting their policies. Now, a couple of additional, I think, interesting thoughts. So we've established that an artist owns their drawing regardless of whether it's on the side of a building, on a piece of paper, canvas, or what have you. What about if the canvas is human skin? In fact, this has been dealt with in the courts because tattoo artists work on the human skin. And what's intriguing is athletes don't own their tattoos, the artists do. And so that's a particular challenge for video game developers who would love to be able to reproduce those tattoos in their profitable video games, and that is in fact not legal, and it's copyright infringement. An interesting aspect of this. So, key points then for us to consider. Artists have the right to control access to their art, and copyright laws around the world are a framework for this. In TGJ 2.0, we respect the copyright for artists' work. And when we use others' materials, we make sure that we attribute according to the licensing agreement for download of those. By the way, you might lead yourself to ask, what about the rules for teachers who incorporate things? In fact, for educational purposes, I have pretty good latitude for pulling material and incorporating it into educational systems, not for profit. As long as it's attributed, I can embed that into my materials, just in case you're curious. The references, if you want to do any more reading on these things, the references are here. You could go ahead and look for those as necessary. Thank you very much, and have a great night.